Daniel's end time prophecies. This is the first part, so to speak, because in one address we can only deal with so much. We hope to deal mostly with chapter 2 and also chapter 8. And then when we give part 2, we hope to deal with chapter 7 and also chapter 11 of Daniel's prophecies. Only the God of heaven can foretell the future, but the Bible is full of future prophecies, and Daniel, of course, is one of those books in the Bible which has lots to tell us. Many of the prophecies have now been fulfilled, but the end-time prophecies still remain to be fulfilled. And so we read in Daniel chapter 4 and verse 17, how it says, "This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know," and this is the point we wish to look at, "that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men." And so we find that the rulers from the beginning of time have been in effect chosen by God. Providentially, he has raised up one and then another, often the basest of men, as we know. And so the God of heaven is actually bringing about the fulfillment of the prophecies, and therefore he's the only one who can foretell the future. And he's given us many prophecies in the Bible. Chapter 2, we read also verse 20-21. Daniel answered and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding." So this is where we get the future foretold then in the Bible. So we wish to look at the king of Babylon's prophetic dream. The king in question was Nebuchadnezzar. He was the one basically who established the Babylonian Empire upon the ruins of the Assyrian Empire, which he overthrew. And we find he had a dream which foretells, an inspired dream, which foretells the 4 world empires. His was the first, but it foretells the following 3, which have come to pass, and also more things about the end times. So reading this then, Daniel 2, verses 31-33. Daniel says to the king, "Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image." This is what Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. "This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head, was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay." So this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw. It was a prophetic dream, and Daniel was told the interpretation thereof by God. So Daniel interprets the dream. He says, "Thou, O king, art a king of kings." He was an emperor. "For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand. And he hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold." So the head of gold on this metallic image that he saw in his dream, the head of gold represents the Babylonian Empire. "And after thee," that is, after the dynasty that Nebuchadnezzar set up, "after thee shall arise another kingdom or empire, inferior to thee, and another third kingdom, of brass. So the silver was to be the second one. It represents the second empire, world empire, and the brass represents the third world empire, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom, or empire, shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. That would be the next phase of the kingdom of men, so to speak, or the civilized world. So this is what approximation of what Nebuchadnezzar saw in his inspired dream. He saw an image. And we find that the head of gold represents the Babylonian Empire. That's what Daniel said in his interpretation. He didn't name the following empires, but we know now from history that the chest and arms of silver represent the next empire, which the Medo-Persian Empire was the next one, which overthrew the Babylonian. And the thighs of brass represent the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, etc. The legs of iron represent the Roman Empire. And then the Roman Empire fell, broke up, and we have today weak nations and strong nations, which basically has some representation in the feet and toes, part of iron, part of clay. Present day situation. But the point is that these empires did not exist all at the same time. There has to come a time when they exist all at the same time, so to speak, for the image to stand. So the image has never really, or what the image represents, has never really stood up yet. The elements appeared, the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian, the Grecian, the Roman. But at the last days, at the end times, a despot has got to forge all the territories of the previous four world empires into one. And in that state, we find that it brings us up to the time of the return of Christ. We'll come to this. So also Daniel 2, we read, "Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together." Well, they've never been together before. One came after the other. So there's got to be a kind of cobbling together of all the territories that the four world empires had by some despot. And certain additional territories he will control as well. This is told to us elsewhere in the prophets. And so the verse 35, then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the end time part. Now it's obvious that the stone must therefore be relating to the return of Christ and the power that will be invested in him to subdue the nations so that the meek can inherit the earth, as he promised in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, Matthew. Reading on in Daniel 2, it says, by way of explanation, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom." That's what this stone power is all about, "which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." An empire that God is to establish. And the sign of this, the symbology in the dream, verse 45, "Forasmuch as thou sawest that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof sure. Well, everything happened as Daniel said. Daniel explained this dream to the king of Babylon in the beginning of the Babylonian Empire, round about 600 BC. And then we had the empires that followed. So let's look at the empires from history now that did follow. We had the Babylonian Empire, which you can see the territory there, how it was the Middle East, including Babylon on the banks of the river Euphrates, just north of the Persian Gulf. It also had Egypt, also the Holy Land, Israel, Syria, Iraq, and also up here into Turkey, at least half of Turkey, as it is called today. That was the civilized world. Beyond those boundaries, there was not much in the way of civilization. And so the rest was not worth conquering at that time. But around about 500 BC, the Medes and the Persians got together and they overthrew the Babylonian Empire. And this had the effect of extending it because the Medo-Persians already had territories around here by the Persian Gulf and in Media. So that was all added to the Babylonian Empire, which they conquered. They got the rest of Turkey, even into Europe, which is Thrace and so on the European side of the Dardanelles. And also Egypt, of course, and the Holy Land. So this was the extent of the Medo-Persian Empire. Then this was overthrown in 331 BC by Alexander the Great. Now Alexander came from Greece, and which was outside the Persian Empire, Greece. He began to invade the Persian Empire, crossing across the Dardanelles, and then he drove the Persian forces back, and he caused the Persian emperor to flee, and I think he went to Media, somewhere over here rather, to get sanctuary in another kingdom. Alexander went into Egypt. The Egyptians surrendered straight away. Same with the Holy Land and many other places. And then he pressed this way right to the river Indus and beyond. His empire extended to India. So here we have India and Mongolia and so on. All right up to there was civilization, was his empire. You notice on this map of the period 500 BC, notice what it says, the Tibetan tribes, the Mongolian tribes, it says. Out here, you've got more or less marauding tribes. It would be another 800 years at least before settled kingdoms would be established in Europe, in Western Europe, outside the boundaries of Alexander's empire. Until then, this was just marauding tribes, generally speaking. And so this was civilization. Beyond it, there wasn't much worth going for. Now, the next one was the Roman Empire, but there was a difference. The Babylonian Empire came rather suddenly by Nebuchadnezzar defeating the Assyrians, who had the first established a world empire, and this basically took over the Assyrian Empire. So in history, his empire is often referred to as the Assyrio-Babylonian Empire. It was a sudden thing within a few years. And the Babylonian Empire was overthrown in a night, basically, by the Medo-Persians. And the Persian Empire was overthrown. It only took Alexander about 3 years to conquer the whole, or the biggest part of the Persian Empire, to drive all the resistance of the Persian powers out of the empire. So they were sudden, but the Roman Empire, that took about 250 years to develop into a world empire. And if we focus now on this part of Alexander's Greek Empire, we find that this is the area, this is the arena where the Romans, who came obviously from Italy, established themselves on part of the original Greek Empire. And then from there, they expanded over 250 years. Eventually, they became, as we shall see, a world empire. And so this is a map showing that point where the Romans expanded from the base in Italy and came into this territory here. Now, what happened basically was that when Alexander died, and he died suddenly, his empire was divided up into four. That is, four of his generals eventually established themselves as kings in their own right on the territory of the Greek Empire. And the Western king, his territory became occupied by the Romans. How it came about was when it was divided up into four, just as a matter of interest, it was divided up into four generals. One general, Ptolemy, he got Egypt. Another, called Seleucus, he got Syria. Another, Lysimachus, he got Turkey and Thrace. And then we have Cassander, who had the Western Kingdom. Now, what happened was, in process of time, the house of Seleucus, under a descendant of Seleucus, Antiochus III, he extended his empire into the areas of the other two kings to the north. And finally, he got this area here into most of Greece, which was part of Alexander's empire. The Romans declared themselves to be defenders of this kingdom here, the Western Kingdom of Alexander's empire. And so they came and they drove the Seleucids out of Turkey and caused them to retreat to their original domains. But in process of time, being the protectors of Greece, they established themselves there. And so they established themselves on a corner of one of the four kingdoms of Alexander's empire. Now, this detail is given to us in the prophecies of Daniel. So we have Daniel's vision. We looked at chapter 2. We're looking at chapter 8 now. We read that in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, he was the last of the Babylonian emperors. A vision appeared unto me, says Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And this was the vision. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had two horns. And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, and northward, and southward. This is another figure for the next empire, prophesying the coming of the Medo-Persian Empire. Medo-Persian, there was the two kings, the Mede, Darius, and Cyrus the Persian, the two horns. But Cyrus the Persian was the stronger, and so eventually he made it the Persian Empire. Notice this animal is depicted as pushing westward. That means it comes from the east. And northward, that means it comes from the southeast. But it still has to push to the south. In other words, it comes from Persia, Iran as we call it today, and it came from those parts, from the east, pushed westward toward Babylon, and then northward up into Turkey, which was part of Babylonian Empire, and southward into Egypt. So that no beast, we read on, so that no beast, verse 4, might stand before him. That is, no power. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. In other words, the Persian Empire. And so we read on verse 5, and as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west. Well, west of the Persian Empire, you've got Greece. So this is now foretelling the next empire, the Greek Empire. On the face of the whole earth, untouched, or appeared not to touch the ground because it was running so fast, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Now, the horns always represent the power. The two horns of the ram represented the Median king, Darius, and Cyrus the Persian king. So this has a great king, a notable one, the Greek king. Well, it's Alexander the Great, as we shall see. Verse 7, and I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler or anger against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. And we read on, verse 8 and 9. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Alexander died in BC 323, only a few years after he'd conquered the Persian Empire in 331. Died suddenly. Nobody knows why he died. He was a young man, very young. The great horn was broken. And his empire was divided into four eventually. And it says it. And for it came up four notable ones, four notable horns, powers on the territory of the empire, toward the four winds of heaven. Yes, roughly north, south, east, and west. That's how they were established, the four kings that took over, the ones I've just mentioned: Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, Cassander. Verse 9, and out of one of them, out of one of the kingdoms, came forth a little horn, a little power, which waxed exceeding great. And it expanded from one of the kingdoms of the Greeks. It expanded toward the south and toward the east. So therefore it was in the northwest. In other words, it was the Romans coming into Greece. And it expanded toward the pleasant land. That's one of the terms to describe Israel. Verse 12, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice. The daily sacrifice was a temple service. Without fail, they sacrificed a lamb every morning and every evening. And it's called the daily sacrifice. And the Romans took it away because they destroyed the temple in AD 70. If we read on, we'll see this. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground. And it practiced and prospered. The Roman Empire fought against Christianity. It was pagan. And verse 13, then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, it being taken away, and the transgression of desolation, the desolation of the land because of the transgression of the Jews, and to give both the sanctuary, that's how the temple is referred to, the temple, and the host, that's the Israelites, to be trodden underfoot. Now the sanctuary, where the temple used to be in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem itself and the land, and the Jews, have been trodden underfoot of the Gentiles ever since AD 70, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, and Jerusalem was destroyed a little later on. Development of the little horn of the goat of Daniel 8. So here is a depiction of what Daniel saw in his vision. He saw a ram, the Persian Empire, being attacked by a goat, the Greeks, with a notable horn, Alexander. Then he saw how the horn was broken, like that. And then four horns came up out of it. And although they've not been able to draw it very well, a little horn came out of one of those, a little horn of the goat, which was the Romans, establishing themselves on the area of the Greek Empire. This, of course, is a depiction of Daniel himself seeing this vision. So we read on then in Daniel 8. The ram, this is the explanation. It's not my explanation, it's the Bible's explanation. The ram which thou sawest, having 2 horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. Well, that's what we said. We said it because it says it here. It tells us what these things represent. And history tells us that that's what it was. Verse 21, and the rough goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king of the empire, Alexander. Now that being broken, Alexander dying in Babylon, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 of his generals, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation or the territory of the Greek world empire. But not in his power. In other words, they will not be descendants of Alexander the Great. So they were not of Alexander's power, so to speak. Verse 23, and in the latter time of the kingdom, when that's the kingdom of the 4 horns, the 4 kings, in the latter time of their arrangements, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance, this is the Romans, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. It uses the term king for all the rulers of the empire that followed, one after the other. The emperors, in other words, of Rome. Now, the emperors of Rome did understand, or claim, shall we say, to understand dark sentences because they imposed their religion upon the empire, which was pagan. And the Caesar was regarded as being the pontiff, the head of the pagan religion. He was often regarded as being divine. And so he was the interpreter of the pagan religion. So he claimed to understand dark sentences. Verse 24, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. In other words, it will not be a dynasty. One king and his son reigning after him and his son after him. It wouldn't be like that. It would not be in the power of one man. Because the Caesars were appointed. They were appointed by the Senate. And so he would be powerful. The emperors would be powerful, but not in their own power. Not in their own right, so to speak. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty, which the Romans did. They overthrew many mighty kings and the holy people. That's the Jews, the Israelites. He destroyed them in AD 70. The destruction was pretty bad in AD 70. Jerusalem was set on fire. The temple was totally destroyed, not one stone left upon another. But the final eradication of Jerusalem came when they put down a rebellion of the Jews that were left in AD 135. That was the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Then they razed Jerusalem to the ground and they replaced it with a new city called Aelia Capitolina. And Jerusalem today is somewhat built on that plan of Aelia Capitolina. So there it is, the Roman Empire at its greatest extent. It started from Italy. They established themselves in Greece, which was belonged to one of the 4 kings, the Western king of the Greek Empire. So they became a little power to begin with, sprouting out of that Western kingdom, and then they expanded. And they expanded also westward. And so they extended also, it also indicates the extension of civilization. Now Europe was becoming more civilized. Eventually 10 kings appeared, principal kings in Europe, around about the 5th century, 6th century AD. And so civilization was coming on apace. Britain also was brought into the, England at least, and Wales, into the Roman Empire eventually, but it didn't remain in the Roman Empire very long. And consequently, it's not included in the final image. It's not included in the legs of iron, the Roman element. The other prophecies show us that the British will be on the opposite side of this cobbling together of the 4 world empires. They will be cobbled together by another despot from the north. We'll deal with that in a subsequent talk. But Britain will be one of those powers opposed. We just look at chapter 9 up for a moment. And after 62 weeks, now this is a prophecy in Daniel regarding the coming of Christ the first time. And so Christ in the Hebrew is known as Messiah. That's the Hebrew equivalent for Christ. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. He'll be killed. Crucified, as we know. But not for himself. In other words, he won't have done anything wrong. But he's going to be executed. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city, that's Jerusalem, and the sanctuary, that's the temple. This happened in AD 70. It happened because the Jews rejected Christ. And therefore, 30-odd years later, providentially, God sent the Romans to destroy Jerusalem and the sanctuary, the temple. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. Unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. Yes, unto the end of this, it's always been desolate, ever since then. That is to say, the Jews have never had their kingdom back in Israel and prospered. Of course, we've got Israelis today, but still the Gentiles predominate in Jerusalem. Verse 27, that is, they dominate, not predominate in numbers perhaps, but they have domination over parts of Jerusalem. Verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Yes, God's covenant with the believers. This 1 week, in the Bible we find, we're not dealing with time periods today, but in the Bible we find that generally speaking, time periods in prophecy are given in days, a day to represent a year. So a week is 7 days, so it's talking about 7 years. It's the 7 years of ministry of John the Baptist and Jesus. John ministered for the first 3.5, Jesus ministered for the last 3.5. And almost at the very end of the 7 years, that's when Christ was crucified. And so it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, if we study that carefully, it means the latter part, at the end, basically, of the period. He shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Christ caused it to be unnecessary because the sacrifices of the temple represented the sacrifice of Christ. They typified it. They foreshadowed it. Once Christ was sacrificed, the believers didn't need to bother anymore about the temple service. And so the sacrifice and oblation, in effect, was nullified at that point. He caused it to cease at the end of the 7-year ministry of John and himself. And for the overspreading of abomination, we notice these words, abomination, overspreading of abomination. An abomination is something which is sacrilege as well as terrible. Well, destroying the temple was sacrilege. It was still God's temple, and the Gentiles coming and destroying it was sacrilege. It was an abomination. And he shall make it desolate. Yes, the temple and the city was made desolate. Abomination, desolation. Remember those terms. Even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. Actually, the later translations render it desolator. In other words, the Gentile desolator of Jerusalem, the Gentiles are the desolators of Jerusalem, they have been historically. It will end. That time will end. The last one who tries to desolate Jerusalem will actually have poured out upon him desolation. That determined be poured out upon the desolator. Jesus refers to this in the last week of his life, before he was crucified. Mark chapter 13, we read, and as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Yes, all that's left now is the retaining wall, the western wall, the retaining wall of the Temple Mount. But even there, some of those stones are assessed to weigh 90 tons. And that's the kind of stones that Herod built when he modified the temple. Verse 2, and Jesus answering said unto him, seest thou these great buildings, that's the temple, and all its outbuildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And that's how it is today. That's how it was as of AD 70. He's foretelling what Daniel foretold. And so he refers to Daniel in verse 14. He says, but when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, in other words, he's referring to what we just read in chapter 9 of Daniel. So you see how the Bible is one book in total harmony, perfect harmony. Much of the New Testament consists of quotations of the Old Testament. It doesn't always tell you that that's what's happening in the Bible, but when Jesus says the meek shall inherit the earth, he was quoting from the Psalms. And so that's so much of his teaching was quotations from the Old Testament. Likewise with the apostles. It's one book. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation, the Roman power, the pagan Romans in Jerusalem, with all the pagan paraphernalia, and then desecrating the temple and destroying it, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, the only ones who didn't suffer terribly in the siege of Jerusalem were those who listened to this. There were followers of Christ, Christians. And when the Roman legions came, they realized what Jesus had said, and they fled from Jerusalem to a place called Pella in the north. And they survived. But those who didn't listen didn't. Most of them perished. Yes, that's an image of the desecration. This is a photo of the Arch of Victory in Rome, built to celebrate the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, the Roman general. And it's showing the desecration that took place. That's the menorah, the 7-branch candlestick, taken right out of the holy place. And many other things here, taken out of the holy place of the temple. Desecration. And they're parading them before the roaring crowds in victory. We read what Josephus had to say. Josephus was a Jewish historian at the time of AD 70. Zealot rebel leaders, John of Giscala and Simon, were captured by Titus, the Roman general, in Jerusalem in AD 70 and were paraded in Rome in the procession depicted on the Titus Arch. And so some of the Jews were forced to carry their sacred treasures in servitude to the Romans. Now, that's not word for word, obviously, from Josephus, but if you want to read the information about that, Josephus, in that section, it can be read there. So Jesus went on to say, now in Luke chapter 21, there are 4 gospel records. 3 of them have an account of what Jesus said on this occasion. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We've considered the account that Luke has, Mark, but now we just see what Luke said, because there's some more information recorded for us about what Jesus said on that occasion. And so, Luke 21, verse 20, and when ye shall see Jerusalem, this is exactly what Mark said, but there's some more information coming. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is near. Then Jesus went on to say, in the next verse, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains. This is what it says in Mark as well. And let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, because the people of Jerusalem had Jesus crucified. That all things which are written concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, many things in the prophets are written about this event, foretelling this event. He's saying all those things will be fulfilled then. Verse 24. And they, the Jews of Jerusalem and Israel, Judea as it was called then, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, but not forever, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And that's what Daniel said. Eventually, the wrath of God will be poured out upon the desolating powers of the Gentiles. Especially when a despot comes against Jerusalem with all the forces of the territories of the old world empires cobbled together, plus many more besides. And then we have the battle of Armageddon, when the times of the Gentiles will be fulfilled and the wrath of God will be poured out upon the desolating power. He continues in Luke 21, and there shall be signs in the sun, he's speaking about his return, and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity. So he's now moving on from AD 70 to the end times, and the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts filling them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then he says, verse 27, and then shall they see the Son of Man. That's how Jesus referred to himself. Then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Remember the stone cut out without hands, smiting the image of the Gentile empires on the feet and grinding it to powder and eventually filling the whole earth. So we get the same in Daniel. Just looking in chapter 7 briefly. Verse 13, another vision. I saw in the night vision, says Daniel, and behold, what? One like the Son of Man. This is how Jesus referred to himself, and for good reason, because this is how he is spoken of in the prophets, how it's foretold of his coming. One like the Son of Man came with the clouds, as we just read, of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom. Well, that's what Jesus said. He would come in great power. Yes, the kingdom of men will be given to him. The territories of the old world, the four world empires will be given to him. The territories of the last despot who will be destroyed in Armageddon will be given to him. Indeed, the whole world will come under his power and his influence as an empire. That all people, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. We shall not pass away. And his kingdom or empire, or this in fact could be the kingdom of Israel, because the kingdom of Israel is to be restored. We find that in other prophecies. That which shall not be destroyed. And so we read, again, the words of Jesus in Revelation chapter 16, verse 15. Jesus said, behold, I come as a thief, regarding his return. It will be sudden, unexpected. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. And he gathered them together, that's the nations, into a place called, in the Hebrew tongue, Armageddon. Why the Hebrew tongue? Because it's to be in the land of the Hebrews. It's to be so Armageddon is in fact a Hebrew word. It's given to us in the Greek scriptures and translated into English, but actually it's a reference to certain Hebrew words brought together as Armageddon. And so it will be on the mountains of Israel that the final conflagration will unfold, so to speak. Then the image will fall. Its feet of clay will be broken. And this is where we get the term from. You may have heard the term, such a company has got feet of clay, or such a politician has got feet of clay, or they get it from the Bible here. The feet of clay of this image. Just back to Daniel 2 to bring our remarks to a close. We've read this, but we'll read it again. It's relevant at the end times. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So that brings us to the end of our little talk on some of the end time prophecies of Daniel.